Hello, I'm Carolyn Glick. I'm a senior columnist at Israel Hayom, and thank you so much for joining us in this panel discussion where we're going to be talking about the regional implications of President Trump's leadership of peace in the Middle East through the Abraham Accords. And we have here with us in the studio in Jerusalem at the Government Press Office, we have Professor Yugin Kantorovich, from George Mason University Law School and from the Kohelet Forum here in Jerusalem for policy. And we have Dr. Eddie Cohen, who's a senior researcher at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies at Bar-Ilan University. And with us remotely are Abdallah Jûnaiyd in Bahrain. He's a senior Bahraini journalist and policy analyst, and he's going to be speaking to us from Bahrain. And we have Rami Aziz. He's an Egyptian academic who's now currently at the University of Rome, and he'll be joining us as well to talk about the implications of the Abraham Accords and more generally of President Trump's vision for the Middle East and how it's being played out in their countries. So just very briefly, last month we saw the really historic event at the White House. I was very privileged to actually be at the White House for the ceremony for the signing of normalization and peace agreements between the State of Israel and the United Arab Emirates on the one hand and the Kingdom of Bahrain on the other. These were the first peace accords that Israel had signed with Arab countries since 1994 with the signing of the peace deal with Jordan. There was something very different about these agreements from what we've seen. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that we're calling them normalization accords. And the reason why I find this notable is because in the two peace treaties that Israel signed in the past with Egypt and with Jordan, the Arab states that had signed the deals with us were very clear to stipulate that they would not implement the normalization clauses of the deals that they signed with Israel, which is very strange. You're signing an official peace, but yet you don't want to normalize your ties with Israel. And here we skipped over the whole question, peace, no peace, because of course, according to the UN Charter, the normal relations with among nations is supposed to be peaceful, and then it was just a question of normalizing them. So the fact, I think, that we jumped straight to normalization was one of the really sort of revolutionary and appealing aspects of this deal, and we saw it also in the warmth between the delegations at the White House last month. And the first question that I really want to open it up to the panel to discuss is, what changed here? What is it about Trump's mediation of the ties between the State of Israel on the one hand and the UAE and Bahrain and then other states that Dr. Eddie Cohen is going to talk about? What is it that's different here that engendered these different kinds of relations and this different kind of agreement? So I have some ideas about the Israeli side, which we can talk about perhaps later, but I'd like Professor Yugin Kantorovich to start the discussion of the panelists about what really is different here, and how do you look at it?
Yeah, I think what made it possible in part for President Trump to successfully bring this about is he is not a Washington insider. He came from outside of Washington, from outside the world of business, and he did not buy in to what everybody knows in Washington. And in Washington, there's many things that everybody knows are true, that are repeated over and over by Middle East experts who have PhDs in the Middle East in Washington. And they've been said for decades, and they've become kind of like a religion and completely unchecked by the facts. So, for example, one of these was that recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel would bring war with the Arab world. President Trump didn't believe it. He did it, and he saw that the Middle East experts were wrong. There was no war with the Arab world. So he also understood then that another thing that the Middle East experts said, that the central issue in Israeli-Arab relations has to be the Palestinians. That is the central axis, the only thing anyone cares about. That this was not a statement that was based on facts. So it has not been true for a long time. This reality had already changed. So President Trump didn't change the reality so much as recognize that it had been changed and not be religiously attached to this dogma. So relations between Israel and many of the Gulf states have been warm and good unofficially for a while. But previous administrations didn't want to recognize that because it would contradict this narrative that they believed in. And also, it would show the mistake the previous administration made in the Iran deal, which allowed Iran to accelerate its nuclear weapons program. And the reality of the Middle East today is that so it's often been divided on axes. During the Cold War, it was a Soviet-U.S. axis, but now the main axis is those countries threatened by Persian imperialism, and those countries who have become victims of it or on the side of it. And that is the fissure that he recognized. He didn't create that, but he wasn't afraid to admit it. And also, as a businessman, he understood that normal countries, what they really want to do is they want to help their own interests, to advance their economies, to develop, and that these ideologies that were holding back the Middle East were not ideologies that were native to the Middle East. They were ideologies from Brussels, from the European Union, from Washington, that were being imposed on the region in a way that held everyone back. He didn't subscribe to this. So he said, we can go forward and just leave these ideas behind. And because he had not internalized this, what everyone knows to be true, he could see that, the emperor has no clothes, that it's all a fiction, and achieve a breakthrough. But I think the point is the breakthrough had been very close in a sense. You just had to recognize how close it is and not be ideologically against realizing it.
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of willful blindness that was going on, particularly in Washington and in the European Union, and frankly, also in the Israeli left. I think that one of the things that, we've been talking about a lot of is whether you can have peace for peace or whether it's all, it has to be Israel making concessions to the Palestinians in order for other countries in the Arab world and the Islamic world to be willing to meet Israel and see it as a partner and as a neighbor. And I think that one of the sort of revolutionary ideas that Prime Minister Netanyahu specifically has been pushing really since the outset of his political career is this idea that Israel has a lot to offer the countries of the region and really of the world, and that instead of talking about ourselves always in respect to the people who reject our right to exist, that we should be talking about ourselves and developing ourselves so that people understand that there's a basis for cooperation between them and Israel, whether we're talking about African countries or Latin American countries or, of course, our neighbors here in the region. And I think it's a very friendly and pragmatic way of looking at things, and also that's based upon a true understanding of what Israel has to offer. And I'd like to turn it over to you, Abdallah Junaid in Bahrain. You've actually been publishing and openly discussing relations between Israel and Bahrain for a few years. I think the first article that I saw that you had written about it, I think was in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps I missed earlier ones. But I think we had Bahraini tourists already coming to Jerusalem well before the signing of the Abraham Accords. And I'd really like to understand, what is the thinking, what was the thinking in Bahrain, and how did Trump's arrival on the scene in 2017, of course, with his historic visit first to Riyadh and then to Jerusalem, as his first trip as president, what kind of impact did that have in Bahrain?
I believe, Caroline, the will of the people jointly, and also the shift of the U.S. administration in terms of playing more pivotal role in encouraging all parties involved to take a step forward. That is the first. Second, the will of the people. I tend to agree with you in terms of encouraging people to people policy instead of state to state. And that had played a major role. Bahrain have hosted Jewish community. They are part of our fabric. They are part of our social history. So if they travel to Israel to see relatives or otherwise, it's again playing a role. And they are not seen or treated as Jews or a part of Judaism before they are Bahraini. And this is quite an important factor in the whole equation. The other element here is definitely the invigorating historical or geographical history that was dormant for quite some time. I don't believe that the Israeli aspirations are different than the Bahrainis or UAE or the Saudis or the Omanis or Kuwait. So forging forward is what we all need to continue investing in, as people are not just states. We need institution, organization, NGOs and so on. Like the event today taking place, I'm talking to you, to American, to Israelis, Arabs, and we need to continue putting the ball forward instead of going back to old luggage of history. I believe that the title of the agreement, being called the Ibrahimi or the Ibrahim peace accord, should be the main corner, because this is the historical common ground that unites all the people of this region. And if we lost focus, we will not deliver what we are promising to the future generation of a normalization or a normal relation between the people of the region. If we're gonna face challenges in the future, we need to face those challenges united. I mean, Iran is only part of the challenges. But I promise you, what we'll be facing down the road 10 to 15 years is going to be totally different picture, different challenges. The biggest challenge now, or hurdle to go over, is speeding up the processes of making people to people engage at all levels. Second, we will be facing crossing over from the challenges resulted from the coronavirus and epidemic. Now, we need to focus also on the social impact, other challenges, destabilizing the Middle East. We have Syria, we have Iraq, we have Libya, we have a lot of issues that we need to really focus on. So I believe this region, through this new approach, could add a new element that will be empowering and enchanting a lot of prospect future.
I think it's such a beautiful sentiment that you just described here about the basis of friendship, that it really is the ancient brotherhood between Isaac and Ishmael in the Bible as the children of Abraham. Because, we talk a lot about the strategic shared interests that the parties to the Abraham Accord and more widely share vis-a-vis fighting or contending with a threat posed by the Muslim Brotherhood and its associated terrorist organizations, from Al-Qaeda and Daesh to Hamas and others, and also the threat that Iran poses to the nations of the region. But I think it really is true that, like you said, that we're focusing on the national identity of the parties of the region, allowing Bahrainis to express themselves as Bahrainis, and Israelis, of course, to express ourselves as Israelis, and so on and so forth. And I think that the potential for friendship as a result of that we're all, in the words of our Psalms, that we're all able to cultivate our own fig tree and our own grapevine, and yet do it in friendship and offer each other what we have to offer on the basis of mutual respect is really a profound concept. And with that, I do want to move over to Eddie Cohen, and then pass it over afterwards to Rami Aziz, because I think that, first I want to talk a little bit about the potential, because we keep being told, oh yes, they're right down the pike, right away, we're going to have another country or two that's going to be joining in. And I want to talk to you really about, how the countries of the region who weren't at the signing ceremony at the White House view this, and the potential for them and what it really means to them. So, Dr. Eddie Cohen, can you give me a sense really of what's happening? How are the other countries in the region looking at what's going on? And looking at Trump. And,
eventually, almost all the Arab countries, at the end of the day, will normalize the relation with Israel. Now we are talking about Sudan. Israel had a lot to give to Sudan. I spoke with many Sudanese people. I had an interview with the first time for Israeli in a Sudani magazine. The Sudanese, they said, we are not Arabs, we are Africans. They said, the Palestinian cause, it's not linked to us. We don't care about the Palestinian cause. And I want to tell you something, what you asked Eugene before. What happened? You ask him, what happened? Why now? The Palestinian issue is dead in their mind of the Arab leaders. Right. Believe me, Caroline. Maybe not among the Arab population, but in the Arab mind, this cause is dead. Why? Why now? The corruption in the PA, the endless war between Fatah and Hamas. In the PA refused the aid of UAE, the Emirate aid for the coronavirus. People are dying. In Chairman Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, refused to receive this aid from UAE. This is unacceptable. The Arab leaders want security. Why? Israel will help them militarily? Of course not. Some Israelis think that because of Iran, these countries will normalize with Israel. No, that's not true. Israel will not send aircraft to help the Gulf countries. The American administration has, as you know, dozens of bases also in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait. The British are there. So this is not the real cause. The real cause that these countries, these Arab leaders, want to be part of the Western world. They want to be part of the civilized world. They see their interest, the interest of their people. They want technology. They want to come to Israel to see this country. They want a cultural, they want to meet the Jewish people. So they have their enemy. Their enemy is Iran.
Well, what's holding them back?
They suffered a lot with the Obama administration. They suffered a lot with this administration. They believe, I spoke with many Arabs every day. Arab intellectual thinks that the Democratic Party is linked with the brother Muslims. And I think yes also. They think surely that Biden administration will bring back the Iranian
okay, we're
agreement.
We're going to talk about that in the next round, but I'm wondering specifically, what is it about what Trump has been doing that has brought this all above the table for the first time?
He said, my way or the highway. Trump, who decide? Let's be clear. Who decide? Who protect these leaders?
The US.
America, the US. You want to be king? You want to still be the king? Say what I'm saying. Do what I say. That's it.
And so it was the American leadership that has pushed this above the table.
Definitely. Trump leadership pushed the Arabs, and also the Arab leaders saw the truth. They saw that the enemy is not Israel. They saw the failed cause, the Palestinian cause. All these elements, plus Trump charismatic administration, pushed the Arab leaders to do this miracles accords.
So do you think that Sudan is down the pike? Where's Oman? What are they going to do?
Last year in Sudan, there was a coup d'etat. Omar al-Bashir is in jail. He was Muslim Brotherhood. So now, these days, there's another administration or rulers, Sudanese leader, very open, Brigadier Barhan. He met Prime Minister Netanyahu. Sudan needs technology. Sudan needs water. Sudan needs Israel. They told me, we need technology. We need investment. Now it's on the list of terror, U.S. list terror. They want to remove it. Trump told them, normalize with Israel, we will remove. We'll bring investment. We'll bring money. We'll bring jobs, technology. The Sudanese has no, what kind of dispute we have with the Sudanese government? Nothing.
You know,
Nothing.
It's interesting, and I want to move over to Rami a second. You know, I remember, what Eddie is saying is he's portraying this as really very much a function, so much of what's moving of American leadership. And I look at Israel's relations with Egypt, and I'm thinking of two things. One is former Defense Secretary Don Rumsfeld wrote in his memoir that came out several years ago that every time that he met with President Mubarak in Cairo, that Mubarak sort of would start the conversation by saying, we support the Palestinians. And then he would move on to whatever it was that he wanted to discuss with Rumsfeld. And that Rumsfeld was sort of unique among American policymakers who looked at, and he wrote about it, that he felt that in Mubarak's case, every time that he talked about the Palestinians, it was sort of the same thing as clearing his throat. Like it was a formality that he felt he had to say, and then he went on to the next thing. And what we're seeing really, I feel like with Israel and Egypt, I want to understand how important Trump is, because I saw already with the overthrow of Mubarak with American support, which we'll talk more about maybe if we have more time in the second round, but that Israel was instrumental in getting congressional support for al-Sisi when the military came in under public pressure and overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood government that was formed there, that was there for 10 months with Morsi. And that the Israeli-Egyptian relations really started, expanding during the Obama administration, when both sides saw that they really, for the first time, recognized that they could be allies with each other. So I wanted you to talk about that, and also about, well, what changed with Trump then? What is it about what Trump has done that has really changed things from an Egyptian perspective?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for my best regards to all colleagues. Your question is very accurate. It's a wonderful question. You mentioned a very important and sensitive point in the relationship between Egypt, Israel, and U.S. For Mubarak for a long time, during his term, 30 years, considered himself as a broker for peace between Israeli and the Palestinians. And he, let me say it frankly, in direct way, he considered Palestinian cause is his own business. One is the strong paper using to put pressure over the different American administration to get benefits from the United States. He did a grave mistakes to Egypt before the United States, before Israel, because he limited the relationship between the strategic, important relationship between U.S., Israel, and peace between us only to Palestinian cause. Instead of Israel and Egypt has many other perspectives can working together. For Sisi, the issue is completely different. Sisi realized well that Israel and Palestinian cause shouldn't be linked to each other. He doing his best to help the Palestinian people, but at the same time, he looking for the Egyptian-Israeli benefits, the Egyptian-Israeli common interest. Let us give an example. When the Obama administration suspended a significant, important military equipment in 2016, during our sensitive time when Egypt had a serious war against ISIS branch in Sinai, the only country supported us in the intelligence level, military level, was Israel. So we realized well that our neighbors is more close for us than the United States. That was a very sharp mistake from the former administration. I want to make it clear here enough to differentiate between the United States and the different administration. We here are talking about Obama administration. You know what happened to the Egyptian people? The public opinion towards the United States during Obama administration was awful. The Egyptians started to say the United States is our enemy. And instead of this long decades of strategic alliances between Egypt and the United States after Camp David agreement, the Egyptians said the United States is our enemy. In spite of this billions of dollars we received from the United States and the significant unlimited aids we received from the United States, but during this sensitive time when Obama's administration supported the Muslim Brotherhood and acknowledged the desires of Egyptian people to overthrow the religious ruling between two quotations, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Egyptian turned to Russia and started to say, Russia is our friend, the United States is our enemy. So what I'd like to say here is Obama administration get a sharp harm to Egyptian-American relationship. So President Trump from day one realizes that Egypt is very important. He shouldn't let Egypt go away from the United States. He worked hardly to maintenance the relationship between Egypt and the United States. He received the President Sisi as a House Vice for the first time in April in earlier 2017. He released all the suspended and economic sanction over the Egyptian regime, and he returned the military aid to Egypt, and he supported Egypt significantly in the international arena and in its war against terrorism in Sinai.
And did that really, I know that obviously had an impact on U.S.-Egyptian strategic ties after the Obama administration. Did it have impact on public opinion of the United States as well among Egyptians?
Again, I can't hear you.
The public perception of the United States. You said that Egyptians, for the first time since Camp David under Obama, began looking at the United States as their adversary, as their enemy. Did that change? Has that changed over the past 3 years of the Trump administration?
Yeah, completely. Absolutely. Yes. From day one, President Trump gave Egypt, not only President Sisi, when he supported Sisi, he supported Egypt. So the Egyptian people realized that that the new president who sits in the White House, he is not supported for the Muslim Brotherhood. Is not supported for our enemies. He supports the Egyptian states. He will do his best to prevent the collapse of the Egyptian state. He supported Egypt not only in its fight against terrorism, against ISIS, but in economic level, in diplomatic level. The Trump administration did a significant things to Egypt and to Egyptian people.
Okay. All right. So I think, I was planning on going back to you, Eugene, but I think I want to actually start the second round with you, Abdallah, in Bahrain, if you don't mind. We'll just change a little bit the plan, because I think, now that he mentioned the sort of distinction between the Obama administration and how they were perceived by the Egyptian people for their support for the Muslim Brotherhood and, of course, their nuclear deal with Iran. What I was wondering, we're looking forward, just next month we're going to have presidential elections in the United States. From an Israeli perspective, the stakes are very high from our perspective, because the Obama administration was the most hostile administration towards Israel really in the history of U.S.-Israeli relations. And Biden has promised to reinstate all of Obama's policies, both towards the PLO and the Palestinians, and also towards Iran. He's pledged a number of times, and the entire Democratic Party has pledged a number of times to reinstate America's commitment to the nuclear deal with Iran, which of course we all know will give Iran an open road to a nuclear bomb within just a year or so. So, and of course the UN weapons embargo against Iran is supposed to end now at the end of October. So we're talking about, from an Israeli perspective, the vast majority of Israelis support Trump, and because of all of the things that he's seen. And so going forward, on the one hand, the positive part, if Trump is reelected and we have sort of a continuation of the policies that we've seen over the past 3.5 years, what do you think, how do you put Bahrain in that picture? Where do you think it's going to lead? And also, what do you see from a Bahraini perspective as the future for us under a third Obama administration for short-term purposes, for shorthand purposes, which is basically what we'd be getting with Joe Biden, who's vice president?
I think, Caroline, probably one of the most important points is for all of us, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, all the GCC nationals, and also for Israelis, to depart from yesterday's narrative. We need to engage each other a little bit differently. Eddie was talking about Obama forcing our leadership to accept something like this, and I must state my reservation on such a statement. We had suffered under the Obama administration for 8 years and tried for a regime change in all the regions. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, Oman, but we stood up to that administration and we survived without the need. And the U.S. forces that was describing being there to defend us against Iran, at that time, they were in cahoots with Iran and Turkey to divide the whole Middle East between Iran and Turkey. So what we need to do, first of all, to understand, are we apprehensive in terms of a third term for the Obama administration? Yes, we are apprehensive. Are we pessimistic? We are definitely pessimistic. But can we, as a region, stand up with the help of Israel or without the help of Israel? I'm sure we can go another round with the U.S. administration. But definitely, as a region, forging forward, we definitely value Israel as a friend going forward from this point out.
And I think, it's very interesting because one of the many things that Trump has been criticized for since he really started running for president in 2015 is his nationalism, is what he refers to as his nationalism, that he wants to promote America first. But I think that what we're hearing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Abdallah, but I think nationalism is sort of something that's shared by the nations of the world, that we love our country, we love our fellow citizens of our country. Certainly this is true in Israel, and we're proud of our nation and our national identity. And I think that the real question is, if I respect and love myself and my nation, then I can probably be a good friend to the Bahrainis, to the Egyptians who love their country and their fellow people, and that really it is the national identity that we have, our attachment to our countries, that lets us go out into the world and be good allies and partners to other nations. And so, Eugene, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the nationalism and how this is going to play out either in a second Trump term or really what's going to happen to these burgeoning alliances between nations if we have another post-nationalist American government that sees the world in terms of worlds, which is sort of an imperialist way if we look at, from the Yoram Hazony's dichotomy between nationalism and imperialism, the Sunni Islamic empire, which would be led by a Turkey or Daesh or whatever that is, or Wahhabis, whatever, so that you have a sort of a Sunni imperial perspective and a Shiite imperial perspective of Iran. So where is that sort of the basis of the nationalism versus pan-nationalism or post-nationalism that we would see in a Biden administration versus a second Trump term?
First of all, I think that you make a very important point that when one values, people might say, what is Israel, Bahrain, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, what do they have in common? They're all nations. Right? They're all nations. And if one nations with great pride in themselves, and if one thinks that like a nation or nationalism is a bad thing, one is less able to conceptually and instinctively resist imperialism. And that is why I think the Obama administration was ineffectual in the face of Iranian imperialism, which is what it is. Iran was taking over more and more Arab nations, but if you think that the nation is unimportant, then then who cares? I think that the spirit that comes from Washington affects the whole world, and the kind of just the mood that comes from Washington, it has a great effect on the whole world. And we can see that, even aside from the Middle East, during the Trump presidency, for example, the European Union has been much less aggressive in its campaign to isolate or boycott Israel. They went on vacation. They really toned it down. It's not that their views have changed. It's that no one wants to go against Washington. And the mood set in Washington sets the tone for the whole world. So even for example, though the Gulf states had relations and had ties with Israel during the Obama administration, the open embrace of Israel by Trump makes it easier for everyone to get on board. So countries that were already sympathetically inclined, like the UAE, can have open relations. Europe, which is not sympathetic, is going to be less overtly aggressive. So a change even in mood from Washington, even aside from any concrete policies, and there's going to be very different policies also, of course, with regards to Iran, we should worry about it because it will, I think, has the potential to slow down and dampen the movement of real Middle East peace, which is what we are seeing now. Which is why I was very encouraged by what Abdullah said. The alternative is for the countries of the region to understand that the Biden administration is not going to have their backs against Iran, and not to be influenced by this mood. And if Biden is elected, to know that Trump has allowed us to get this far, but from here on, the countries of the Middle East, Israel and the Gulf states need to take it the rest of the way themselves, and not let a bad wind from Washington disturb their improving relations. But I definitely think sort of the pace of peace in the Middle East is one of the things that is at stake in this election.
I think you're very right. And so let me just turn it to you, Eddie. I mean, you were talking earlier about how the Obama administration is very much associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. Just how much of a danger is the Muslim Brotherhood still? After all, the Trump administration did decimate, for instance, Daesh, ISIS in Syria and in Iraq. I mean, there's been some sort of a renaissance of Daesh in certain areas there. But, has he done enough on the ground and also sort of in people's heads to enable the kind of camaraderie that we're discovering with our regional neighbors to be maintained in a Biden administration? How will the nations view their own interests going forward in a Biden administration, and of course, obviously, in a second Trump administration?
The two dangerous things on the Arab world is Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood. Definitely, you can ask any Arab in the Gulf area, in Syria, in Iraq, they will tell you Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, you spoke about the Muslim Sunni countries. We used in Israel to focus on these countries several years ago in the media, but now it's changed. Now we have two sides. We have one side, Qatar, Turkey, and Iran. Qatar and Turkey are Sunni, and Iran is Shiite. Against the other, Egypt, UAE, Bahrain, Israel, USA. So we cannot speak about now Sunnis and Shiite. The pact, the Turkish, Iranian, Qatar pact is against the peace process. They don't want peace. I met a lot of people in the Gulf, in the Bahraini people. They are so kind. I met Saudis. I met also UAE. They want peace. They don't care now. They don't peace. They were afraid. There were these concepts about the Palestinian issue. Now they want peace. Which dispute I have with Mr. Abdallah? We haven't have any war together. There's no dispute. Why not? Shall we make peace? Why not? Why not? We cannot make peace with them, and we can visit each other.
So what about a Biden administration?
Biden, unfortunately, if I were Muslim, Arab, American, I would vote for Trump. Definitely. Biden will bring Iran. Iran is destroying the Arab countries. Iran is destroying Iraq, destroyed Iraq. Lebanon is dominated by Hezbollah, by Iran. Syria, Assad, Syria, and also Yemen. Iran is destroying all the Arab countries. Biden will lift the sanction on Iran. Biden will have more ties with the Muslim Brotherhood. I think that Donald Trump, if he will be elected, he will consider the Muslim Brotherhood as a terror organization. I think he will do it. And he will save the Arab world from them.
Well, Rami, let me just ask you a final question. So Egypt was the biggest threat that Israel faced for our first 4 decades of existence, or 3. And then we were kind of in a very cold peace. It was really just a long-term ceasefire between Egypt and Israel. And Mubarak, as you said, was, he was playing both sides against one another in many ways. And now we have a very close cooperation with the Sisi government. How do you see things going? The turbulence that the Obama administration brought to Egypt, the instability, the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood. How do you see, how strong is Egypt going forward? How is the regime looking at the threat that a pro-Muslim Brotherhood U.S. administration would pose for its very existence? And where do you see the future of Israel-Egypt ties, either under a second Trump administration or going forward with a third Obama administration under Biden?
Yeah. Thanks again for this good question. The people in Egypt, not only the government, they have a fear about returning of Obama administration. You said something, I will quote it. You said the third Obama administration. If Biden have succeeded to be in the office, he will be an extension for Obama and Hillary Clinton's. And to know what they are going to do, you need just to read the Hillary Clinton emails to understand the realities and facts. We are not talking here about the speculation. We now have evidence, clear evidence about what happened, about the volume of damage they caused to our economy, to our people, to our countries, So the Egyptians are very keen about the future of the United States and who will be the president. If Trump stay re-elected for another term, I think everything will be stable, will move forward between Egypt and Israel. But the good thing is, if Biden becomes a president, even the Egyptian-Israeli relationship will be strong. Now the Arab people, including Egypt, realize it well that the region should depend about its own selves. We shouldn't wait the help from outside, even if it's come from the United States. The difference between what President Trump brought to the region immediately, he has a common interest like Obama to withdraw from the region. But the difference is Obama withdrew from the region and delivered the region to Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood and Turkey and Qatar, and he sent billions of dollars to Iran as a reward for them after signing the nuclear deal in 2015. But Trump wanted to withdraw from the region, but before withdrawal, he wanted to establish a good coalition, very strong, solid coalition between moderate Sunni countries and Israel to protect the region and to take care for the region, to develop the region. We are not talking here only about military action. There is many things Arab Sunni moderate countries can do with Israel on technology level and water level. Egypt will have a problem with water shortly, according to the current crisis situation between Egypt and Ethiopia and others. So we have many things to do. So the good thing is that Egyptian people realize it, and the Arab people in general realize it well, that we can't live away from Israel for a long time. Let me use and quoted the recent survey here by Zogby organization. 58% of the Egyptian people looking positively to Israel, and they willingness to have a good relationship with Israel. We are talking about 59% in Saudi and Jordan. We're talking about 56% of the people in Emirates are looking for a good cooperation and different perspective with Israel. So everything has changed. The future is for the cooperation between Arab moderated Sunni countries and Israel, regardless who is sitting in the White Office. But let me say something frankly, this is a direct fruit for the President Trump action towards the Middle East. He pushed the Arab leaders to be in public relationship with Israel. We have a good, the most of Arab countries, Gulf states, they have a good relationship with Israel for decades, but behind the closed door. President Trump said, enough is enough. We should to be in public.
I think you're absolutely right, Rami. I think that this has been an incredible discussion, and I think that one of the things that we really take away from here is just how exactly what Rami said, and I think it's an important place to end, which is that what Obama wanted to do was leave the area and transfer it to the imperial powers of the Iranians and the Muslim Brotherhood. And what Trump has done that's been so revolutionary, and that we can look forward to if we can look forward to another 4 years with him, it will be extraordinary. And if not, we'll survive, because what he did was he unlocked the belief that we could move forward as individual nations, that we can trust ourselves, that we can defend ourselves, and that working together we're going to be able to accomplish shared goals, whether they're in technology and in fighting the coronavirus on the one hand, or water technologies, or really whether it's facing our common adversaries in the Muslim Brotherhood and its assorted terrorist organizations, or whether it's facing Iran and its assorted terrorist organizations in places like Lebanon and Syria and beyond. So I think that this has been an incredible discussion. I think we have a great deal to thank President Trump for his visionary leadership and his iconoclasm, which has unleashed the imaginations and the cooperations of the nations of this region. And I thank you all for a really fruitful discussion, and I hope we'll have a lot more of them, even in person at the end of the coronavirus. We'll welcome all of you and your friends from the UAE to Jerusalem. Thank you very much.
Caroline, quickly, can I add something quickly, if you allow to me?
I think we're out of time.
But quickly.
Why don't we do it? If we can do it, yes. If you can put it in, that'd be great. We'd love to hear more. Yes.
Yeah, quickly, I would like to say something. I'm a natural analysis for the Middle East affairs, observing the situation carefully. What I'm going to say here is not advertising for President Trump. I'm talking as a natural researcher and analysis. But I'd like to say, if the people of Middle East, they have the right to vote inside the coming American administration, they will vote for Trump, because that is for them mean more stability and more security, and no return for the actual movement and Muslim Brotherhood and Iran again.
I think you're right. I think there was just a poll that came out that said, I don't know whether it's 63 or 68% of Israelis would be voting for Trump as well, which is probably even better than he's getting in Alabama. Anyway, take care, both of you, and both of you here with me, and hopefully we'll see a lot more of you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.